Salutation was the first colt of our own breeding. And in some ways, he represented the start of the breeding group that we had in mind, which was to breed Kamil and Salan to Tripoli daughters, and then to breed our Kamil and Salan daughters back to Tripoli. And Charles pointed out to us that in doing that, we were breeding just the blood of Mayday, Tripoli, and Kamil and Salan. And he pointed out that that group of horses does not trace to the original imported mare, Rishan. And he thought that it was worthwhile doing that. He encouraged doing that sort of thing when it was possible to breed without a certain ancestor in the interests of preserving genetic diversity within this closed group. That wasn't our intention in the beginning, and nothing wrong with Rishan. She certainly was valuable in every pedigree she's in, but we did have these horses that we were breeding, and we liked them, and we intended to continue to do that. We did not start out right away with Salutation, by breeding him to mares. We still had Kamil and Salan at the time. So Salutation went on lease to Jim Bribben in Ohio, who got 2 colts from him from Salomein. One he gelded, and the other was a very worthwhile breeding stallion named Reflection that bred on. Then from Bribben's place, Salutation went to Craver Farms, and Charles had him on the farm for several years, actually, and bred him to some of his very finest Hamdani mares. At the time, we were calling them Sipalawi mares. Now, because of this new information, we call them Hamdani mares. Anyway, he also had 2 mares, Troth and Trill, who were in that small group that did not trace to Rishan. And he got several very worthwhile horses while Salutation was there. And then he returned Salutation to us. And unfortunately, he didn't live very long after he got home. But among those horses were, as I said, some very valuable ones. We tried to continue the non-Rishan group and did as long as we had stallions that were in the group. But one by one, they died, or yes, we lost them. And the last one we lost was Mimmack. With the loss of Mimmack, we didn't have any more possibility of breeding that non-Rishan group. So we looked for and hoped to hang on to some of our own breeding. And we called upon the kindness of Debbie Jessen in Illinois to lease us for a breeding season Sergeant Major, who was sired by Ibn Alamein and out of Major Barbara. Major Barbara, I thought, was the best of the 3 sisters that were by Kamil ibn Salan and out of Moth. Not to say anything negative about the other 2, I just thought that Major Barbara was beautiful and very, very, very correct, and we did not have her blood, and so we wanted that. So we were lucky to get Sergeant Major with us for a season, and he produced nicely for us and for others. Among those were my last mare, Lili Marlene, who was by Sergeant Major, and out of Kestrel, our Salutation daughter. Lili Marlene produced colt, excuse me, that we called Flashback, sired by Bah-Rani, who belonged to, or still belongs, he's still alive, belongs to Jay Wilson and Chris Leon Bruno. At that time, they were in Reno. They're now in Cedar City, Utah. So, I'm getting close to the end of the story. One thing I want to mention about, though, before the end of the story, was that Salutation sired the best riding horse I ever had. He was really of our breeding, but he was out of a Tripoli daughter, Vivacity, that Charles owned, and Charles bred him. He was owned by a woman named Jennifer Flynn in Illinois, and she got to the point where her sons were in high school sports, and she needed to move to town, and she was no longer riding the horse and looking for a home for him. So at age 18, he came to me, and he had been very nicely trained in dressage by one of Alice Martin's students. And he was by far the most supple and the most sensitive horse I ever rode. And that was coupled with a very quiet, wonderful disposition. So a lovely horse, sired by Salutation, out of a Tripoli daughter. Anyway, we came to the point where I was unable to continue with this. My family encouraged me to look for homes for the remaining horses. There were two remaining. One was Lili Marlene, who went to Mary Gill's, a Davenport breeder in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And Flashback went to Jay and Chris in Utah, Jay Wilson and Chris Leon Bruno, where Bah-Rani, his sire, lives. So good homes for both of them. And that kind of winds up the story. It's been a very engaging, intriguing, absorbing, and joyous journey. And that's it.